Imagine waking up one morning and deciding to go on a road trip. But this isn't just any road trip. You're taking 60,000 people with you. You're carrying so much gold that everywhere you stop, you accidentally destroy the local economy just by spending money. You're so wealthy that modern economists literally cannot calculate your net worth. And when you arrive at your destination, the most powerful rulers in the known world drop everything just to meet you. This isn't a fantasy. This isn't fiction. This happened. In the year 1324, a man named Mansa Musa left his palace in West Africa and walked into history in a way that no human being before or since has ever quite replicated. And here's what makes this story so extraordinary. Most people in the Western world have never heard of him. Or if they have, they've heard maybe 30 seconds of his story reduced to a single sentence. He was the richest man who ever lived. But that sentence doesn't even scratch the surface. Because Mansa Musa wasn't just rich, he was a military genius. He was a diplomat. He was a builder. He was an educator. He was a man so strategically brilliant that the effects of a single journey he made, a single trip across the Sahara Desert, were still being felt in global markets more than a decade after he made it. Today, we are going to go deep. We are not skimming the surface of this story. We are going to explore who Mansa Musa really was, how he came to power under genuinely mysterious circumstances, how his empire worked, what his famous pilgrimage actually did to the global economy, the architectural and intellectual legacy he left behind, and most importantly, what the lessons of his reign mean for us today, in the 21st century. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, the way you think about wealth, power, and African history will never be the same. Every great story needs an origin, and Mansa Musa's origin is one of the most intriguing in all of medieval history, because it begins not with a coronation, but with a disappearance. To understand how Musa came to rule the Mali Empire, you have to understand the world he was born into, the Mali Empire. The Mali Empire in the early 14th century was already one of the most powerful political entities on earth. It had been built on the foundation laid by Sundiata Keita, the legendary warrior king who had founded the Keita dynasty roughly a century before Musa's birth. The empire stretched across an almost incomprehensible expanse of West Africa, from the Atlantic Ocean in the west all the way to the edges of Lake Chad in the east, and from the Sahara Desert in the north down through the fertile Niger Delta in the south. We are talking about a territory that covered parts of what are today Mali, Guinea, Senegal, Mauritania, Gambia, Niger, and Burkina Faso. This was not a small kingdom. This was a continental superpower. Musa was born into this dynasty around 1280. Historical sources suggest he was the son of a man named Fagaleye and the grandson of Abu Bakr, who was himself the brother of the great Sundiata Keita. So Musa had royal blood, but he was not necessarily first in line for the throne. He was part of the royal family, educated, positioned within the imperial court, and deeply committed to his Islamic faith. But he was not the Mansa, the emperor. The man who held that title just before Musa is typically identified in historical records as Abu Bakr II, sometimes called Muhammad ibn Ku. And here is where the story takes its first truly strange turn. Abu Bakr II, the reigning emperor of one of the most powerful empires in the world, became obsessed with a question: what lies beyond the Atlantic Ocean? This was the early 14th century, remember, more than 150 years before Columbus made his famous voyage. And yet this African emperor looked out at the vast Atlantic and asked the same question that would consume European explorers for generations: what is out there? Abu Bakr II did not just wonder, he acted. According to accounts that Musa himself later gave to Egyptian officials during his famous pilgrimage, accounts recorded by the Arab scholar al-Umari, Abu Bakr II assembled a fleet of 2,000 boats, filled them with men and supplies, and launched them into the Atlantic Ocean to find out what lay beyond the horizon. He then, remarkably, abdicated his throne, appointed Musa as his deputy to rule in his absence, and sailed away on the Second Fleet himself. Neither Abu Bakr II nor any of those 2,000 boats ever returned. And so Mansa Musa, the deputy, the caretaker, became the emperor. He always maintained that his succession was entirely legitimate. He had been appointed by the previous ruler and simply continued governing when that ruler failed to return. But you can imagine how historians have looked at this story with raised eyebrows over the centuries. Was it really that simple? Did a man who had every reason to want to be emperor simply wait patiently while his predecessors sailed away? Some scholars suggest Musa may have had a more active role in engineering his predecessor's departure. Others take Musa's account at face value. The truth, lost somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean along with Abu Bakr II's fleet, will likely never be known. What we do know is that around 1312, Mansa Musa took the throne of the Mali Empire. And whatever the circumstances of his rise, what he did with that power is beyond dispute. He immediately set about expanding the empire through military campaigns. Consolidating control over the critical trade routes that were the lifeblood of Mali's economy, and preparing for something that had been his dream for years: a pilgrimage to Mecca, the holiest city in Islam. Before we can understand the full impact of Mansa Musa's story, we need to understand the economic engine that made him possible. Because Musa's wealth wasn't luck. It wasn't inherited in a simple sense. It was the product of a carefully structured imperial system that controlled some of the most valuable commodities in the medieval world. The Mali Empire sat on top of an almost absurd concentration of natural resources. Most famously, the regions of Bambouk and Bure, located in what is today western Mali and eastern Guinea, contained enormous deposits of gold. And not just any gold. This was gold that could be panned from riverbeds and extracted from open deposits without requiring the kind of deep mining infrastructure that would only develop centuries later. The gold was accessible. The gold was abundant. And crucially, the Mali Empire controlled the territory where it came from and the routes along which it travelled to reach the outside world. Here is a number that should stop you in your tracks. At the height of the Mali Empire under Mansa Musa, historians estimate that Mali was producing roughly half of the entire Old World's supply of gold. Half. Every piece of gold that passed through Europe, the Middle East and North Africa had a reasonable chance of having originated in Mali's territory. The empire didn't just have gold, it essentially was the gold market for the known world. But gold alone doesn't explain the full picture. The second great commodity of the Mali Empire was salt. Now, in the 21st century, we take salt completely for granted. We shake it onto our food without a second thought. But in the medieval world, salt was not a seasoning. Salt was survival. It was the primary method of food preservation in an era before refrigeration. It was essential for human health in hot climates where people sweated out enormous quantities of sodium. And the Sahara Desert, which bordered the Mali Empire to the north, contained massive salt deposits, most famously at a place called Tigaza, where the buildings themselves were literally constructed from blocks of salt, because there was so much of it. The Mali Empire controlled the trade routes connecting the salt deposits of the Sahara with the gold-producing regions of the south. This was the classic trans-Saharan trade. Gold moved north, salt moved south, and the empire taxed everything that passed through its territory. This taxation system was brilliantly simple and extraordinarily effective. Mansa Musa didn't need to mine the gold himself or dig up the salt himself. He simply needed to control the geography. Every merchant who wanted to move goods through the most direct and safest routes across West Africa had to pay tribute to the Mali Empire. And so the wealth flowed into Niamey, the imperial capital, in a constant self-sustaining stream. Beyond gold and salt, the empire also traded in ivory, copper, cola nuts, and enslaved people, a deeply troubling aspect of this history that we should not gloss over. The slave trade was embedded in the economy of the medieval world across cultures and continents, and Mali was no exception. Mansa Musa himself captured and held enslaved people, who formed part of the labor force of his empire and the entourage of his famous pilgrimage. This is a complicated truth that coexists with his genuine achievements in architecture, education, and diplomacy. History rarely gives us simple heroes. By 1324, when Musa began his famous pilgrimage, his empire contained an estimated 400 cities and towns, supported a population ranging from 40 to 60 million people, and produced wealth on a scale that the medieval world had never seen concentrated in a single ruler's hands. He was ready to show the world what Mali was, and show the world he absolutely did. The Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. For Mansa Musa, this was not just a religious duty. It was an opportunity to demonstrate to the entire Islamic world exactly what the Mali Empire was. And Musa did not approach this opportunity with modesty. The scale of the entourage he assembled is staggering by any measure. Estimates range from 12,000 to 60,000 people. Soldiers, porters, scholars, officials, and the women of his court. Ahead of the procession walked 500 enslaved men, each carrying a staff of gold. Behind them came 80 camels, each loaded with hundreds of pounds of gold dust. This was not a diplomatic convoy. This was a city on the march. When the procession reached Cairo in 1324, Musa began distributing gold with the casual generosity of someone tossing spare change, to the Sultan, to officials, to scholars, to ordinary people on the streets. He reportedly gave away as many as 18 tons of gold during his time in Egypt alone. The result was catastrophic for the Egyptian economy. Gold flooded the market, its value collapsed, and the ripple effect spread across the Middle East for over a decade. Mansa Musa, on a single road trip, accidentally triggered an economic depression in one of the world's major financial centers simply by being too generous. He later borrowed gold back from Egyptian merchants at high interest to stabilize the market, the most peculiarly human detail of this entire extraordinary story. The pilgrimage was also a diplomatic triumph, drawing scholars and architects to his court, most notably Abu Ishaq al-Sahili from Granada, whose influence would permanently reshape West Africa's physical landscape. And the impact reached Europe too. The Catalan Atlas of 1375 depicted Musa on his throne holding a gold nugget, and the image of a fabulously wealthy West Africa that his pilgrimage had burned into the world's consciousness would eventually help drive the European age of exploration southward along the African coast. Musa returned from Mecca with architects, scholars, and a vision. He immediately launched a building program that transformed his empire's cities. Al-Sahili designed the Jinguereba Mosque in Timbuktu using an innovative mud brick technique, and that mosque still stands today, over 700 years later, as one of the most remarkable structures in Africa. Musa also built the Gao Mosque, Madagu Palace, and an imperial audience chamber at Niani, establishing an architectural identity for the Mali Empire that announced its place among the great civilizations of the world. But the most enduring achievement was intellectual. Sankore University in Timbuktu, built under Musa's patronage, eventually attracted between 25 and 30,000 students. Jurists, astronomers, mathematicians, and poets from across the Islamic world. Its library grew to contain as many as 700,000 manuscripts, making it one of the largest repositories of human knowledge anywhere on Earth at that time. Books in Timbuktu were reportedly more valuable than gold. Musa understood something that many rulers before and since have failed to grasp. Wealth without knowledge is fragile. The most durable legacy an empire can leave is not its gold, but its ideas. Mansa Musa died sometime between 1332 and 1337. His approximately 25-year reign was Mali's absolute peak, its golden age in every sense. His son Magan I succeeded him, followed by his brother Suleiman. But the slow decline had already begun. Within a century, the empire had fragmented, and by the 16th century, the Songhai Empire had displaced Mali as the dominant power in West Africa. Interestingly, Musa's own Mandinka oral traditions remember him with more ambivalence than the Arabic chronicles do. While Arab scholars like Al-Umari praised him as generous, just, and brilliant, Mandinka griots sometimes criticized the waste of his wealth on the pilgrimage and his departure from indigenous customs. History rarely gives us simple heroes, and Musa is no exception. But the Jingwerebber Mosque still stands. The manuscripts of Timbuktu still exist, and maps drawn in Europe from 1339 onward depicted him as the most powerful ruler on earth. The evidence of what he built speaks louder than any debate about how he spent his gold.